March 9, 1957. It was not only Bobby Fischer's 14th birthday, but it was also, up until that point, the most important day of his chess career. It had only been months since Fischer had played the famous game of the century that put the Fischer name out into the chess universe. But here was an opportunity for young Fischer to prove that he truly belonged to be in the circle of the most elite chess players, because his opponent was none other than Dr. Max Euwe, the Dutch chess player who was also a world champion from the year 1935 to 1937, and the chess player who had played more or less all of the most legendary chess players of that time. The Manhattan Chess Club, to their credit, was sponsoring this 2-game exhibition match because they wanted to give Fischer the opportunity to play world-class players. However, the prize fund offered by the club was a measly $100, 65 to the winner, 35 to the loser. But it's the thought that counts. In this game 1 of the 2-game exhibition match, Euwe played as white and Fischer played as black. Let's take a look at the game. Euwe opened the game with d4, making a claim to the center. The two most popular replies are d5 and knight f6, both of which stop the immediate e4. Fischer chooses knight f6, c4, establishing a firmer grip over the center, especially the d4 square, but also allowing white to develop the b1 knight without blocking his c-pawn. e6, fighting for d5, opening up the diagonal for the dark-squared bishop. Sometimes this move may make it more difficult to develop the light-squared bishop along the c8, h3 diagonal, although, as we will see, it won't be an issue in this game. Knight c3, developing the knight and strengthening control over d5 and starting to fight over the e4 square as well. And now Fischer decides against playing bishop b4, the Nimzo-Indian defense, and instead chooses to get into the queen's gambit by playing d5. C takes d5, Euwe decides to get into the exchange variation of the queen's gambit, which is a popular way of playing. Fischer will take back with the pawn. Taking back with the knight is a little more complicated, resulting in white being able to play e4. And after knight takes c3, b takes c3, black has to know to play the move c5 to slightly break white's center. Otherwise, white will gain a decent advantage. After that c5 though, the position will be about equal, if not slightly better for white. But it will be a position that is not visually appealing for black, and it will be a little easier for white to play that position. Fischer played e takes d5. In this position, Euwe plays the best and by far the most popular move, bishop g5, pinning the knight. Black usually plays bishop e7 or c6, and those are the best moves. Fischer plays something different, bishop b4, ignoring the pin that Euwe played and creating a pin of his own. Now, if you're going to play this move, you have to be prepared to play it, because you have to have a plan for unpinning your knight, since the easiest way to unpin would have been to just play bishop e7 instead. Ultimately, this bishop b4 move is not a mistake, and is tricky. In fact, Magnus Carlsen lost 2 blitz games against this bishop b4 move back in 2021, both of them against Ian Nepomniachtchi. Euwe played e3. Now that we have developed the dark squared bishop, we can play this move so that we can develop the other bishop too. h6, putting a question mark to the bishop, but Euwe decides to keep the pin alive with bishop h4. Fischer played c5, challenging white's central pawn with one of his less central pawns. This is certainly not a losing move, but it does hand white a slight advantage if white plays bishop b5 check or d takes e5, because it leads to an isolated d5 pawn for black. Isolated pawns are generally, and I emphasize the word generally, weaknesses because they cannot be defended by other pawns and require extra care. Euwe did not choose either of these two moves that create an isolated central pawn for Fischer, but still played a good move. Euwe played bishop d3, developing the bishop and allowing Fischer to play a move like c takes d4 and create an isolated central pawn for both him and Euwe. But Fischer decided to play knight c6, developing the knight and attacking the d4 pawn. Now there is a threat, and if white does nothing, black can play c takes d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, winning the pawn. Knight e2, defending the d4 pawn and choosing not to put the knight on f3 because it avoids some of the potential issues Euwe would have with the knight on f3, including a bishop g4 pin, which would be harder to break than with the knight being on e2, since in certain lines we have the potential to play f3 to break that pin. Secondly, in certain lines, black has an annoying queen e7 check, which the knight on e2 now blocks. C takes d4. Fischer decides to get into a position where both sides will end up with an isolated central pawn. Taking with the knight, knight takes d4, leads to a position where neither side will have any distinct advantages. So a very equal position after knight takes d4, knight takes d4, e takes d4, queen e7 check, queen e2, castle kingside, queen takes e7, bishop takes e7. And this is quite equal, as we can see. Euwe took with the pawn to avoid a position like this. So e takes d4. Fischer brought his king to safety with castle kingside. As we will see, even with the king being castled, we still have to recognize threats as they appear and make sure to address such threats. Euwe castled as well, castle kingside. Now Euwe has a threat. If black does nothing, he can play bishop takes f6, and after queen takes f6, Euwe can play knight takes d5 and win a pawn. Fischer played bishop e6, protecting the d5 pawn. Bishop c2, Euwe has a crude idea. He wants to play queen d3, bishop takes f6, and then queen h7 checkmate. Now, even though this is an idea that is easily stopped, black still has to devote a little bit of a time to play moves designed specifically to stop this idea. We should never offhand dismiss such ideas in our own games. Bishop e7, Fischer transitions his bishop from an offensive role to a defensive role. In this position, Euwe would be making a mistake by simply playing queen d3 due to the move knight b4, forking the queen and bishop, and then taking the bishop once the queen moves out of the way. It's also too early to play bishop takes f6 and followed up with queen d3 because of the move g6. Let's look at that on the board. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, queen d3, g6. Black is more than fine in this position. He is slightly better. He will have ideas of playing moves like bishop f5, attacking the queen, or once again, knight b4, forking the queen and bishop. Let's look at what Euwe played. Euwe played knight f4. This is another simple idea, which is to take on e6 and create a weak e6 pawn. Even more weak than the isolated d pawn that black already has. Of course, that idea also helps Euwe's bishop takes f6, queen d3 plan. Notice that if we are able to insert the move knight takes e6 somewhere in that line, that g6 no longer works because the f pawn would have to take on e6 and would no longer be protecting the g pawn once it moves to g6. Fischer had played the move queen b6 in this position, but let's look at some alternatives here. One alternative is queen d5. Here, white should play knight takes e6, which will create a backward e6 pawn in black's camp, or if black captures with the queen, white should be able to play rook e1 to take the e-file with tempo. The queen d7 move stops white's queen d3 ideas because bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, queen d3, threatening checkmate on h7. Black has the move g6. And of course we can't try any knight takes g6 sacrifices because black will play f takes g6, and after queen takes g6 check, black's own queen covers the 7th rank, covering both h7 and g7. So queen g7 there would stop everything. Now let's look at black's other idea that works. Bishop d6, attacking the f4 knight, which is undefended, and also opening up the diagonal for the queen to be able to take on f6, and from f6 the queen can act in a defensive role against white's threats along the b1 h7 diagonal. White still maintains a slight advantage, but it is not straight up losing for black. White will play knight takes e6 or even knight h5 here to maintain a slight advantage, but bishop takes f6 would fail and lead to a very equal position, which is one of the reasons why this bishop d6 move works. For example, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, queen d3 threatens checkmate on h7, but black easily stops that with queen f5. So we see how bishop d6 allows black to be able to play this defensive idea. Now let's get back and look at what Fischer actually played. Queen b6, the critical mistake of the entire game because it ignores Euwe's threats. Recognizing when there are threats and how to meet them is critical in chess. Here Euwe plays with precision to take advantage of Fischer's mistake. Euwe plays bishop takes f6, getting rid of an important defender of the h7 square. Bishop takes f6, queen d3, threatening checkmate on h7, and there's really only two ideas for stopping it. One is to create space for the king by moving the f rook. That is what Fischer actually played. The other idea is g6. Let's look at why g6 also fails. So g6, knight takes e6. The f7 pawn has to give up its protection over the g6 pawn if it captures that knight back. For example, f takes e6, queen takes g6 check, bishop g7, queen takes e6 check. If rook f7, we have ideas of bishop g6, attacking the pinned rook and capturing it on our next turn. The other attempt by black is king h8, queen g6, threatening mate on h7, king g8, stopping the immediate mate, queen h7 check, king f7, bishop g6 check. If king f6, we have knight takes d5, forking the king and queen. Otherwise, black might play king e6, and we simply play queen takes h7. The black king is in a minefield with our rooks being ready to come onto the open e-file. Checkmate will be coming soon. Now let's go back and see what Fischer tried. So instead of g6, Fischer played rook fd8. Fischer was hoping to create an escape route for his king, but as we will see, it does not work. Euwe played rook ae1. Queen h7 check would have also worked. Fischer played knight b4, but would g6 have worked in this position? Let's take a look at that. So g6, knight takes e6, and black is left in a position where playing f takes e6 simply does not work because f takes e6, queen g6 check, bishop g7, queen takes e6 check. White is up 2 pawns and black has a king that is going to be chased around. We are also going to be looking to play knight takes d5 and take the other pawn as well. White is completely winning. Let's look at Fischer's knight b4 move now. Knight b4, forking the queen and bishop. Queen h7 check, the only logical move in the position. King f8. In this position, Euwe played what might at first seem like a strange move, but it is in fact the right move. a3. What can we say about this a3 move? The black knight serves an important role on b4, which is to protect the d5 pawn. Euwe just wants that knight gone from that b4 square so that he can carry out his plan, and he is even willing to let Fischer take the c2 bishop and has no intention of capturing that knight with his queen because Euwe has a knockout blow. Fischer did respond by taking the c2 bishop. Fischer does not have much choice. Knight takes c2, and here there is an amazing move that Euwe played. Knight c takes d5, attacking the black queen and also performing other important functions like covering the e7 square from the black king. It should be noted that knight f takes d5 would have also done the same trick, but let's analyze this position. If black plays bishop takes d5, Euwe has queen h8 checkmate because the rook covers the e file. If king e8, let's not forget we can simply take the queen, knight takes b6. If g6, we can also just take the queen. Fischer played rook takes d5 and Euwe played knight takes d5, once again threatening the queen and also threatening checkmate on h8. If bishop takes d5, we also of course have queen h8 checkmate. Let's look at what would happen if black were to play king e8. So king e8, queen h8 check, king d7, knight takes b6 check, taking the queen with tempo, a takes b6, queen takes a8. White has a massive advantage in material and is going to easily win this game. Now let's go back to the actual position. There is absolutely nothing that Fischer can play here to save his position. Seeing this, Fischer resigned. He walked away in tears into the bitter, cold New York day. Everyone loses at some point. It is important that we, as chess players, be open to learning from our losses and to use our losses as opportunities to improve rather than becoming discouraged or giving up. Above all, we should embrace the learning process. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. See you in the next video.